In this section, we're going to create an RPA bot that can automatically download the mobility data from Google and then execute the Python code. First, let's create a new process. Let's name it as Google Mobility Descriptive Analysis. In this automation, we'll have two main steps. The first step is to download data from Google, and the second step is to execute the Python code. So let's first use a sequence, and let's use two other sequences inside the sequence. For the first sequence, let's rename it as Obtain Google Mobility Data. For the second sequence, let's rename it as Execute Python codes. For the first sequence, obtaining Google Mobility data, we're going to use the web automation to download the CSV file. So let's use an open browser activity. First, you need to decide which browser you want to use, and you can choose any browser. For me, I will choose Edge. You may have other options, but whatever your choice is, make sure that you have corresponding add-ons for your browser. Once you decide the browser type, let's provide the URL for the Google Mobility website. Then we're going to use the click action to click the download button. And let's indicate this element inside our browser. Now, for the click action, let's add a delay in the delay before section. For example, 5 seconds. We do this because it usually takes time for the web page to load. And let's also add a 5-second delay after the click action, because usually it takes some time for the CSV file to be fully downloaded. To test whether the Obtain Google Mobility Data sequence is working, we can close the browsers and run the bot. Okay, so now my bot is working, and make sure yours is working too before you move on. Next, we're going to execute Python codes. Here, we're going to use a very naive approach to execute Python codes, which is to open the Jupyter notebook from the user interface and click the Run button. I choose this approach because it's intuitive and easy. Alternatively, UiPath has this Python connectors, which can be found in the Manage Packages. You can find it in the official packages and the activities named UiPath.Python activities. However, I do not recommend using this Python activities because it takes a tremendous amount of time to configure. Rather, I will show you how to execute the Python codes from the user interface from the Jupyter notebook. Before we configure the activities, let's do some preparation work. First, let's launch your Jupyter notebook. Type Jupyter notebook, and you will see this option. Earlier, we accessed the Jupyter notebook from Anaconda Navigator, but we can also directly open the Jupyter notebook by selecting this option. So let's click and open the Jupyter notebook. And now we see that we will directly come into the Jupyter terminal. Now, you see that in your taskbar, my taskbar is on the left-hand side, yours might be in other places, but that doesn't matter. Now we need to pin the Jupyter notebook to our taskbar. So find your Jupyter icon in your taskbar, and then right-click and choose Pin to Taskbar. Now let's close the Jupyter terminal. Inside the Execute Python code sequence, let's use a click activity. And let's indicate the Jupyter notebook icon in your taskbar. And for the click activity, let's add a delay of 5 seconds for the delay before, because it usually takes some time for the Jupyter notebook to load. Now let's manually click the Jupyter notebook again. Now we are going to record activities to open the Python codes and run them. Now back to UiPath and go to the recording, and let's use a web recording and start to record. Here you need to record the exact same steps as you open the Python codes manually. So for me, my Google Mobility codes are saved in documents, so I click Documents. For you, it might be different. And now, I further select Google Mobility Analysis. Once we are in here, let's click Kernel, and then from the drop-down list, select Restart and Run All, and choose Restart and Run All cells. Now you can see that all the codes are running at the same time. Now you can exit and save the recording. You can see the recorded steps enclosed in the web sequence. And now let's collapse the web sequence and add it after the click activity inside the execute Python codes sequence. And let's rename the web sequence as execute Python codes via Jupyter terminal. Now we have our two major steps ready. However, we still need to add an extra step to make sure that our Python codes are using the correct file that we download from Google Mobility. To illustrate, every time you download the same file, the file will be saved in different names. Here, I downloaded Google Mobility Report 3 times. So for the files that I downloaded in the last 2 times, they will be saved with an extra number behind them. So to avoid this issue, we need to delete the existing Google Mobility Report in the folder. Now let's go back to UiPath and let's use another sequence, and let's rename it as delete files. An important premise for deleting files is that our Python code should be fully executed. That means we can only delete files after we finish running the Python codes. And we can tell whether the Python codes are fully executed by looking at whether the image is saved in our folder. For example, if you save your Manhattan Mobility image in the download folder, and then we can check if this image has been created in the folder. If yes, it means the Python codes are executed and it's time to delete these files. And for this purpose, we can use a file trigger activity. So let's search for trigger, and let's use the file change trigger activity. Drag and drop this into the delete files folder. For the properties, we can keep the change type as changed. And for the notify filters, let's change file name into last write and creation time. And let's uncheck file name. Now for the path, let's provide the path of the Manhattan Mobility picture. For me, the path is like this. You need to use your own file path. And now click OK. Inside the do, let's use a delete activity. And for the path, let's provide the path of the Global Mobility Report. For me, the path is like this. And you also need to use the path of your own. And click OK. Here, we're only deleting the global report CSV file, but not deleting the picture, because the picture is the outcome we want to obtain. And when we use the Python to generate the picture, every time when a new picture is saved in the folder, the old picture will be overwritten, so there won't be duplicated files created. So we do not need to delete that file. Instead, we want to notify the user that the picture is ready for their review. So let's use a message box. After the delete, we can say the Manhattan mobility figure is created. So now we complete our automation. Before you run the automation, make sure that you delete the mobility report that you downloaded before and close the Jupyter terminal and the browser. Now let's run the bot. Okay, so now we have this message box saying that the mobility figure is created. And now let's click OK to end the bot. To see the picture, let's go to the folder, and we can see the newly generated mobility report, and we can see here. And as you can see, there is no global mobility report here because we deleted that once the Python codes are executed. This bot can be used for researchers who are interested in the most updated mobility trend, and you can do some modifications to the bot to make it more interesting. And this project is an example of combining analytics with RPA, and RPA is used to automate the steps of obtaining data and executing the Python codes, and for the Python codes themselves, these are part of the analytics methods.